Want to start with a crazy story that spans 900 miles and several decades. Leslie Rubin with WCHS Television has been working on this story that involves a 50-year-old cold case murder in Canada that has been traced back to a burial site in Putnam County, West Virginia. That's the teaser. Let's bring in a Metro News Talkline this morning from WCHS Television, Leslie Rubin. Leslie, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. Let's just start at the beginning
Yeah.
and kind of walk our way through this case because it's a cold case murder in Canada. Authorities are 50 years later trying to figure out who the perpetrator was. So just walk us into this case.
Right. So in 1975, a 16-year-old girl named Sharon Pryor had left her home to go out and meet friends at a nearby pizza parlor in her neighborhood. She lived in a neighborhood called Point St. Charles in Montreal, Quebec, Canada area. So she leaves and she's never seen again. 3 days later, her body was found in a snow-covered field in Longueuil, Quebec. She'd been brutally beaten, raped. It's also believed that she had been held captive there for several days before she actually died. So police found her partially nude body and they, launched their investigation. This was 1975. But they got nowhere. There were hundreds of suspects interviewed. I mean, this just went on, obviously, for decades. They'd reopened it several times in Longueuil. They were never able to get anywhere. They would get tips to go search certain places, or they searched like a garage where someone was for certain that that's where she had been held captive. So they went there to try and collect DNA, and it ended up going nowhere. But then what happens is that they did have DNA from the scene. Now, you have to remember this is 1975, so at the time DNA doesn't exist. But they had kept different articles of clothing and things that were left behind at the scene that were able to be tested now in the age of DNA. And they were able to get a profile from some of those articles that were left behind. So they run the profile through, I believe this was late last year, where they got a hit on the last name of Romine or Romaine is what it came down to. So the Canadian detectives start going through every single person that they can find. They eliminate who doesn't work. But there was this one guy named Franklin Romine who really was sticking out to them. And they noticed that he had a very active criminal record in West Virginia, and he had some minor infractions, but some other criminal charges in Montreal. They look into it a little bit further. They find out that he had actually raped a woman in Parkersburg in the 70s, broke into her house and raped her. He was released on bond, and it was at that time that he actually fled to Canada. And a year later, that's when Sharon Pryor would be killed. So he obviously becomes their main suspect, and that's kind of what leads us up to now and what happened in Putnam County.
Talking to Leslie Rubin, WCHS Television. So you've got some circumstantial evidence here. You have a suspect who's going from West Virginia to Canada. By all indications, not a nice guy, to put it mildly, Leslie.
Yeah.
So what was the break in the case that kind of really got investigators interested?
So Romine had been dead since 1982, but the Canadian detectives were able to make contact with his living siblings, two brothers in particular. One still lives in Huntington, another lives in Florida. And those brothers gave consensually DNA samples to police, which were then tested and analyzed, and it was determined that it was a hit, as you could say, because it's obviously along the same familial line, but it was not then. The DNA determined that it wasn't, so they were able to rule the brothers out, but their conclusion is that a brother of these brothers would have been the one that would have committed the crime. And he was the only other brother that fit the bill. And then to make it even stranger, the brothers actually told police. They had made several alarming, I guess you could say, admissions or statements to police when they were getting that DNA tested. One of the brothers said, he probably did kill Sharon Pryor because he had tried to rape my wife when I was away in the U.S. Marines. And after that happened, they were never close again. So it seemed like the family was in agreement that, that this was probably right. They didn't really want to believe it. They were very adamant that they did not want his body exhumed because they did not want to bother their mother's grave, which sat right beside of it. So they actually wrote a letter to the court in Putnam County after this petition for exhumation was filed by the prosecutor opposing the exhumation, but the judge sided with the Canadians and Putnam County prosecutor Mark Sorcea. And at a hearing on April 6th, so this was about a month ago, the judge ruled that they could go through with the exhumation.
So have they gone through that process now?
Yes. So last Tuesday, the Canadians flew in and they went up to a cemetery in Fraser's Bottom. That's where this is. It's called the Pine Grove Cemetery. It's a very rural area. You have to go up some very back roads. It's not easy to find, but there is a cemetery that sits on top of this hill that's next to the little white church. And so they came here on Tuesday. They brought in their teams, and they exhumed his body. It took a couple of hours. They got his femur bones from the casket. I believe they took his mandible and some other bones and, any evidence that they thought that could be used in their testing. They bagged him up and took him back to Canada, where right now they're at their lab. At first, they thought that it was going to be a pretty quick process because this is like number one high priority case in Canada right now. It's been deemed one of their most famous cold cases. So they thought they were going to maybe get the results back within about a week, but now they're saying it's going to be about 2 to 3 weeks before they're able to 100% conclude that Franklin Romine was the man who killed Sharon Pryor.
Talking to Leslie Rubin, WCHS Television. Are there still members of Sharon Pryor's family alive? Is her mother or parents, are they still alive?
So that part is obviously, it's just amazing to think. Her mother is 85 years old now. Her name's Yvonne. She still lives in Canada. Sharon has 2 sisters who are twins. Their names are Maureen and Doreen. They still live there. And she also has a brother. Canadian police met with them last Thursday for the very first time to give them Franklin Romine's name. I'm not exactly sure what they knew about what was going on, but I was told that they did not know the name of the suspect up until last Thursday.
Leslie Rubin with WCHS Television joining us. Does this crack the door open here? Obviously, in West Virginia, Putnam County, I'm sure there are cold cases that have gone unsolved. Does this crack the door open that maybe he was involved? Not indicting him, obviously, but now you have some DNA.
So absolutely. This is going to be a big deal for unsolved cases, especially in the 60s and 70s, whenever they can determine that Franklin Romine was in West Virginia, because it's very easy to be able to tell where he was based on his criminal record because he was in and out of jail so much. So they are looking into unsolved missing people, unsolved rapes, and homicides to see if he could be the link that they're looking for. Something else that's kind of interesting to note about Romine is that he was really good at escaping jail and prison. He'd actually broken out of Moundsville State Penitentiary several times. He had charges out of Tucker County, Wood County. He was just all over the place. His criminal record started when he was just a teenager. And so I think it will be, I haven't been able to, nail down, like, this is a case that, he could really be connected to, but it will be relatively easy for the police to determine if he was, not incarcerated and where he was at the time of any of those unsolved cases that they may be giving a second look at. But the prosecutor told me that they are 100% state police are going to be, looking at this guy and seeing if they can get a match to once, they get that information.
Yeah, from reading your story, it seems like Romine, he would get in trouble here and he'd go to Canada. Then he'd get in trouble in Canada and he'd come back to West Virginia. Like I said, and like you said, a long criminal history there. how did they really piece this together, other than the evidence? Just start to look at the criminal record and go, he's free here. This is when it happened. He's in the country there. Is it just good old
I
fashioned
think that
detective
that's
work?
what it really was. This detective, it's Eric. I can't pronounce his last name. I say it's Rassicot, but I know I'm not saying that correctly. They speak French Canadian, and I'm trying my best to say the words correctly. But he specifically, as part of the Longville Police Cold Case Unit, who has been looking at this. Now, I don't know once they, narrowed it down to those different Romaine names, how many jumped out at them, but I know that Franklin Romaine was the one that really stood out. And then from there, it just snowballed.
Well, you mentioned, and that was a key in the case, that this happens in Quebec. They speak French in Quebec, and I believe it was in the original complaint that the suspect
Mm-hmm.
spoke English. He was a white guy
Right.
who spoke
So
English.
to explain what you're talking about, that same night that Sharon Pryor went missing in that area to go to that pizza parlor, there was an attempted abduction of another woman, and right in that same area, right around the same time. Her name was Cheryl Roy. She, something happened. Somebody interfered and kind of spooked him away. But he had a knife. He was wearing a blue ski coat, and he spoke English. And that was one of the things that really stood out to the police, that they knew they were looking for an English speaking man, because in that area, everyone spoke French. And she gave a very good description of the suspect to Longville police that they've had. When you see the comparison of the sketch that was developed from her memory next to Romine, it's really stunning to see how similar they look. So yeah, the fact that he was an English-speaking man really, it also helped narrow him down as a suspect. He'd also bought a car within a couple blocks of Sharon's house, and the tires on his car matched tire tracks at the crime scene. They were able to determine at the time, before they had identified Romine, that the tracks could only be on certain types of cars, and they were able to determine that one of them was a Wrangler, and Romine had bought a Wrangler just in Sharon's neighborhood before her death.
Talking to Leslie Rubin, WCHS Television. Leslie, you don't have to give away your reporter secrets, tricks of the trade,
Yeah.
but we get phone calls all the time. We get tips from folks who call in and say, "Hey, I've got a story here," and we take notes and we follow up on them. When did you realize this was a big story?
So it was one of my friends that I hadn't spoken to, just a friend of a friend of a friend, texted me. I was like, hey, I know you cover cold cases. This may be something. She wants you to take a look at it. If it's not, I won't be offended. Just, didn't want to, let it go. Just thought you might look at it. And I requested the document that she was talking about, and I was reading it, and I was like, oh my God, this is huge. And so we were ready to go with the story, soon after we had gotten that petition for exhumation that was filed in March, just because we had, all of the stuff really that you needed to tell the story. It was all public record. But then when I got in touch with Longville police, they were very, very, very hesitant. One, I'm an American. They don't know who I am. We don't have any trust there. But they did not want the story to come out before they were able to talk to Yvonne Pryor. They just did not. She's ill. She's old. They didn't want to give her false hope. So I had agreed with the Canadians to wait until they were able to speak with her before we published anything, because I didn't want to be the reason that, this mother could get news that, what if it was wrong?
Right, right. Well, it's an amazing story, and of course, a great job of some old-fashioned reporting as well. You can read the story over at WCHSTV.com. And Leslie, I'm looking forward. Now, you've got me hooked. I'm looking forward to the follow-up to see what happens here in a couple weeks.
Hopefully in 2 weeks we'll know, and of course we'll, keep touching base with Longville Police, and they plan to hold a press conference with Canadian media whenever they do get those results back. So hopefully we'll be able to get some good news soon and pass along, and this will, solve this case. And really, I think it serves as a reminder for other unsolved cases that, we're in that pre-ZNA era, that there is still hope and they can still be solved.
Leslie Rubin, WCHS Television. You can read the story at WCHSTV.com. Com. Great job, Leslie. Appreciate you hanging out with me for a few
Yeah,
minutes this morning.
thanks for having me on. Y'all have a great week.
Absolutely, you as well. Leslie Rubin, WCHS Television. Again, go read it. It is an incredible, incredible story. WCHSTV.com.